I'm here with Bill Grimmette, who has just finished a wonderful performance of Frederick Douglass. Thank you so much for coming back to Montgomery College. You're a very frequent visitor, and we love having you here.
I love being here.
It's great. Now, Frederick Douglass had some political appointments. He was the Recorder of Deeds for Washington, D.C., also U.S. Marshal, and also appointed to a special commission to see if Santo Domingo would be annexed, right?
Yes, yes, and he was also the minister to Haiti.
Yes, Chargé d'Affaires.
Yeah, and so he had some interesting political connections there, starting with I think Garfield, President Garfield, appointed him to the U.S. Marshal position, and from that time on, he was in appointed office until later on in his life. But that was during the latter half of Reconstruction, and it was during the part of Reconstruction when the Southern slaveholding powers were retaking the South, and the black people in the South were being terrorized, and they needed their spokesperson. But because Frederick Douglass was connected now in an appointed office, he couldn't go out and speak as freely as he could before. And so the greatest spokesperson for all of these people was now shackled again by appointive office.
Yes, yes, indeed.
It's a fascinating story.
Now, he had some questions that were raised when he did the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass in terms of authenticity, and others who wrote also had the authenticity of the writing questioned as well. Didn't he have Garrison, William Lloyd Garrison, do the preface to that? Yes.
But he wrote it.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
But yeah, people challenged him on everything. He wrote the book because they challenged him on being a slave. So, so yes. I guess it just goes to show that at the period, during the period, it was kind of like now, really, that political issues would create the environment for people to question the legitimacy of anything, and you only had to question it, and a lot of people would believe it, and so Douglass found himself in a position of having to prove that he had been a slave, so he wrote the book. Then had to prove that he wrote the book. Then he had to prove that he was the one behind his speeches, that he wrote his own speeches. People frequently said that some power was behind him writing the speeches, and he was just a mouthpiece. And so, yeah, he spent a lot of time in his life just trying to prove that he. But when people heard him, and especially when they heard him speak extemporaneously, then the word began to get around. Actually, you know, the interesting thing is that people in the audience knew. They knew he was authentic. It was a political game that people played.
Yes,
that,
indeed.
That was at play.
He's such a compelling writer. That narrative, I have never read anything that is so compelling, that is so very clear about what went on, his personal testimony as to what went on. And you alluded to an incident with his aunt being beaten, and that is in that narrative, and it is, you can hear the screams that he talks about.
Yes, but what is even more powerful is that there is a Philip S. Foner compiled thousands, hundreds at least, of Douglass's speeches and his columns from his newspaper, his writings, and put them in 4 volumes. Somebody has, Yuval Taylor edited part of that and cut it down to 1 volume, and you can actually buy that for about $25. And it's a thick book, has a lot of his speeches, and read those. Because if you really want an insight into Frederick Douglass, now you read from 1848 until just before his death, these speeches and these columns. And you get a really great insight into what he was thinking, to whom he was speaking, and his humor. You can't put it down. It's just really amazing. So even though he wrote 3 autobiographies, the narratives, then My Bondage and My Freedom, which I have here, and then the Life and Times of Frederick Douglass, that one didn't sell at all. Because it was after the war, after Reconstruction, right in the middle of Reconstruction, and nobody cared. You know,
Yes.
they thought slavery was over, and,
Yes.
and so what do you got to tell us now?
Right. Little did they know.
Exactly.
He was also nominated vice president with the
Yeah.
by the Equal Rights Party. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I tell people that he was nominated, and people have asked me, did he run for vice president? I said, yeah, he ran from the podium to the exit door. That was about as much as he. There was this woman, Victoria Woodhull, who was nominated, was president, and they placed his name on the ticket. I think it was more of a sort of like the early Green Party in today, that they did it just as a statement more than running, because I haven't found anything where they actually went out and campaigned.
Yes,
But it was a great political step at the time. Yeah.
Was the family happy at Cedar Hill in Washington, D.C.?
Well, I guess Douglass was happy, but I'm not certain if the family was happy. Anna, his wife, never learned to read and write, and so they kind of grew apart over the years. Douglass had a lot of he had Julia Griffith from England, who came and stayed in their house with them for a long period of time. And he had this other woman from Germany, this journalist from Germany by the name of Ottilia Assing, who also visited him and then worked with him for quite a while. And Anna was quite jealous of this, and rightly so. It created a lot of dissension between he and his wife, and he and his children, to see their mother treated so, what they call, poorly. Now, I don't have any evidence that he treated her poorly. This was bad enough, and she said specifically, she said to Amy Post and several other people that she didn't like this at all. And Garrison, when he and Garrison split, Garrison made a big deal of this relationship and how he was treating Anna. And so I don't know if they were happy, you know, in that regard, but I think he was pleased, at least, that and everything he did, he thought about it in terms of what he was doing as a symbol for the people who had been enslaved. Here he was, a former slave, and every appointment, he wanted to use it as a symbol of what could happen if you persevered.
Yes.
It led him, I think, into some miscalculations when he became president of the Freedmen's Bank. The Freedmen's Bureau, they created a bank, had several branches around the country. And Douglass was made president after the bank had become insolvent. When he took over, he didn't know it was insolvent. He lost some of his own money by trying to put it in and trying to keep these people from losing their $25. The federal government, the Congress, should have backed that bank with money, and they did not. And the bank failed and left him kind of hanging out there high and dry. So all of these kinds of ventures that happened after the war found him dallying in things that he didn't really have any experience or skill. Yes. And I think he lost a lot of his clout because his power was as an agitator.
Yes.
He had the gift. If he would have been free to go out and speak to the world, it would have been wonderful. But he was saddled with these various ventures that he was out of his league.
Yes, which with fame does come sort of higher position, but if his calling is one thing, then I think that may happen frequently with people sometimes, where they are able to rise because of a certain gift to a certain position, but then they miss what their original calling was. So.
The Peter principle, right? Rise to your level of incompetence. And in Douglass, it was particularly germane because he was the spokesperson for the black people in the nation. At the time they needed him most, he was not available to them. Not because he didn't want to be,
right,
but he had these political offices which made it impossible for him to go out and say what he wanted to say. He went to speak in Baltimore at one time, and he just went off as if he were out on the lecture circuit. He was called down by all the newspapers, and they tried to get Arthur to fire him, and he chose not to. And I think the reason he chose not to was because he was very useful in that position. and is easier to keep him quiet.